Our next question has been sent in on text by Scott in West Hampstead. He says, Benjamin Netanyahu says that it is shameful for Britain to stop the supply, at least restrict the supply of arms to Israel. Does the panel think that it is shameful, or do they think that Netanyahu's handling of the Gaza conflict has been shameful? Gina Miller.
Well, if you look at the riots and strikes in Israel, against its own people, against Netanyahu, they believe that his handling of what's going on in Gaza and the conflict is shameful, and that he's putting his political career before them, before the people. And this idea that you can crush an ideology, because Hamas are terrorists, but they are touting an ideology that you can close down an ideology with war or end it with war, is simply fantasy. So the idea that he has to go forwards and negotiate peace is really what both sides are asking for, and his own people are asking for that. I wish he would actually put his politics aside and think about his own people.
But what's your view on the announcement David Lammy made in the House of Commons yesterday about arms shipments?
Look, it was last year was 0.02% of arms going to Israel came from the UK, so it's symbolic, as many people have said. But after the restoration of the funding of aid going to Palestinian refugees, plus them dropping the opposition to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, for the warrant against Netanyahu, I think they're saying that Britain is going to be much more critical than just supporting Israel, which is right, because we need a ceasefire. And with the anniversary coming up on the 7th of October, I think it's so important that the government works with international agencies and with other countries, the US and Middle Eastern negotiated nations doing the negotiations, to say that we need a ceasefire as a first step to a long-term peace.
Andrew Rosindell, which bit of this equation is shameful? The suspension of some weapons shipments to Israel by the new government, or, as Scott is asking, Benjamin Netanyahu's handling of the Gaza conflict?
Well, we should be supporting Israel. They're a democracy, a liberal democracy. The people in Parliament on the Labour side that are arguing for a policy which is anti-Israel are effectively... Well, they wouldn't survive in Gaza. Hamas are a terrorist. Gina said that. They are a terrorist organisation. They are funded by Iran. We should not be supporting them. We should be, yes, looking for a long-term peaceful solution, but we must defend a democratic liberal democracy such as Israel. And by doing this, we're actually going against that principle that we ourselves are meant to uphold. We mustn't forget what started this on the 7th of October last year, and the tragic murder of the hostages yesterday, I think 6 of them. I mean, what a day to then talk about stopping arms sales to Israel when the 7th of October is when this began. And it's Hamas are the people that need to go. They need to leave the scene, and then we can work to ensure that the Palestinian people can actually live in peace.
Even if
Hamas are there.
Even if the Foreign Office has concluded through this review that there is a risk that some of these weapons components might be used to breach international law.
Well, they're going to use that principle with all other countries as well. Saudi Arabia, for instance, they're going to employ the same principle. Ultimately, you could argue that about everything. In the end, you wouldn't sell arms to anyone in case it falls into the wrong hands or is misused. So we simply cannot go down that road. And for the Labour government to actually be so against Israel in such an obvious way so quickly, and David Lammy's remarks as well about Netanyahu, all of this adds up to what I think is a Labour Party that is appeasing a certain section of its lost voters rather than doing the right thing.
Tim Farron, what was your view on David Lammy's announcement yesterday?
Well, it's fair to say that other governments, British governments in the past, have done this kind of thing. Margaret Thatcher, Ted Heath, Tony Blair, David Cameron have all suspended arms sales to Israel.
And Joe Biden held up a small portion of arms shipments for Israel just a few months ago.
It's not throwing Israel under the bus. It's about, I am a passionate supporter of and friend of Israel, and a person who wildly disagrees with Netanyahu, by the way. Our sister party, Yesh Atid, led by Yair Lapid, the former Prime Minister, I hope he will be again, and if he is, then there's every chance you'll see diplomatic solution, because Gina said, I don't think there's a military solution to all this. Hamas are terrorists. They can have no future in any kind of two-state solution, and neither can Netanyahu, in my view. So, but I have to say, I have some sympathy with what Andrew says, in the sense that I think that Labour Party's current behaviour on this issue seems to be driven by internal party concerns, dare I say it, a little bit like the Tories are over immigration issues. And I hanker for a government that acts wisely and takes all things on balance, rather than just acting to...
Do you think they should publish their legal advice?
It would be good to see. I mean,
it would be good to see, wouldn't it?
On what basis have they made this decision? I mean, the Liberal Democrats take the view there should be a presumption of denial when it comes to arms trade with a whole bunch of different countries, and you've mentioned some of them already, who are guilty of, far, even greater crimes, should we say, than we suspect Israel may or may not be guilty of at this moment in time. But look, as somebody who counts himself as a passionate friend of Israel, my great fear, or my frustration, can I say that, about Netanyahu and those around him, is they make the life or the job for those of us who want to defend Israel's right to defend itself and to exist at all that much harder. And that's why I think he does need to go.
Dan Hodges, Nick Ferrari on LBC this morning described the government's action as performative. Do you think that's what it was yesterday?
Absolutely. I think, and I'm no Nick and others. Tim, sorry, and others. I'm no fan of Netanyahu, but I think he was absolutely right. And I think the reason why it was performative, I think, firstly, Andrew's absolutely right. I think you have to have the context of this. Literally, the announcement being made as the victims of the Hamas murders were being buried. And I think the key thing to focus on for me is this. I've seen a number of rationales put forward for why the government made this decision, and none of them add up. If you look at if you actually read David Lammy's statement in the House yesterday, he specifically said he had instructed the Foreign Office on him becoming Foreign Secretary to conduct a review of what was going on in relation to Gaza, and was very specific that they had not provided any evidence that Israel was committing war crimes. He was very specific about that fact. So the legal basis, if you like, for the restriction of the arms sales doesn't stand unless you're going to take, as Andrew correctly pointed out, you're going to say, well, theoretically at some point in the future weapons could be used, but you could say that about any weapon. The second argument that some people have put forward is, well, it will have a practical impact on the ground. But again, for example, the arms embargo imposed an embargo on weapons that could be in which aircraft could specifically target targets on the ground. But there was no ban on the aircraft themselves that target those weapons. So that's not going to have any practical impact. You could argue it have a negative impact because it makes sort of proper targeting harder. There's an argument put forward that this would in some way produce diplomatic pressure on Israel and Netanyahu to adopt a different stance. Well, we saw how effective that was by the tweet that was put out by the Israeli government this morning, attacking the British government over this. And that just leaves you with the final point, which Andrew and Tim have actually said, which is this is dominated to some extent by internal party politics within the Labour Party. But even on that level, and again, you've already seen it, I've spent this afternoon arguing with Owen Jones and people on the left who are basically saying it doesn't go far enough in terms of penalising Israel.
It does.
So on no level, either legal, practical, diplomatic, or political, does this decision make any sense at all?
It does seem, Gina Miller, to be neither fish nor fowl.
That's why I think it's really important that they publish the legal advice to see what exactly the 30 licenses that they've put sanctions on.
Can I just say just one thing? Sorry to butt in. Not only should they have an obligation to.
Well, they were
because in opposition,
I was just going to say
David
that.
Lamy
I was just going to say that. In opposition,
that
they were saying.
I agree. Advice. So I don't understand how we can even argue against publishing the legal advice.
I think it's poor form that actually, having pushed and said that Tories should publish legal advice, that he just didn't come out and do it. So we need to understand why those 30 specific export licenses have been suspended out of the 350. But the idea, I think, going back to what you were saying about the funerals yesterday, you need to listen to the speeches of the members of the families of those who were so horribly executed by Hamas. And they are so critical of Netanyahu. And they are standing up at the funerals themselves and saying he has to go to the table and he has to do a hostage exchange immediately for the 101 that are still there and for the Hamas. That's members of the family themselves. They're in much better place than us.
Can I just say
to be saying that and demanding that?
I completely understand the position of the families, right? I completely understand that. But I have a genuine question on this. My understanding was that we consistently had a position that was a cross-party position, which was we did not, as a government, it was the British government's position, we did not negotiate with terrorists and we did not negotiate with hostage takers. Now, unless that position has changed, and I don't know when it did change, and I'm not aware that it's changed, and, you know, the representatives of the main political parties could tell if they've got any information it's changed. I don't think we are in a position to demand. I completely understand why the families are in a position to do that. I completely understand that. I don't understand why we think, as a British government, we should be in a position to pressure or demand Netanyahu engages in negotiations with Hamas over the release of the hostages, when our position is we shouldn't negotiate with them.
But channeling my inner Washington correspondent, which is where I normally find myself, it really doesn't matter what the British government says about that, right? I mean, the American government is pushing Netanyahu. Joe Biden yesterday said he hasn't done enough to negotiate this hostage exchange.
But that adds into what I was saying, is what is the practical benefit of what the government has announced?